Hello and welcome to the Smart Art Business Podcast. My name is Rachel Wilkins, and we have an amazing guest joining us today. We have the awesome Maryanne Chisholm joining us. Hello, Maryanne. How are you, friend?
I'm fine, Rachel. How are you?
I don't know. Not sure because apparently I keep forgetting your name, even though we've been friends for quite some time. But
Quite some time.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. We are recording this at 5 p.m. So there is that. But yeah, big welcome to you. Maryanne and I go back a whole 8 months, right? We have to
Which is
say.
like 800 years in Web3 time.
Exactly, right? This is like we're like OGs now at this point.
We
So
are.
if you're listening to this and you're thinking, what the hell are these people talking about? What is Web3? What is an OG, NFT? Don't worry. We're going to get into all that good stuff. But before we do, I'm going to have Maryanne introduce herself, and then we're going to go on a journey through what has been a very eventful life experience that's brought you to where you are today. So, Maryanne, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Maryanne Chisholm, and I am complex, and I've been through quite a bit. I'm currently an artist and an influencer, and I'm a nice influencer that connects with people. I'm not one of those influencers that just goes to Bora Bora and then skips. I am a Twitter Spaces host, soon to be an Apple podcast host, and I have a really fantastic life at this point, and I'm very blessed.
I love that. And very blessed is something that is, I think you probably say with a really full heart, because you're somebody who has otherwise been through something really traumatic that a lot of people wouldn't even survive or live to tell the tale. And here you are with gratitude, uh,
Mhm.
and just a positive outlook on life. So we're definitely going to get into that. But what I would like to do, Maryanne, is if we can go way back. I want you to take me to like your early days. Now, we've not even gone this far back in your story because a lot of it's focused on the last kind of 15, 16 years. But do you remember like the first time you felt that yearning to be creative? Can you like pinpoint a time where you felt that?
Yeah. Um, I grew up in a very talented family. My mother studied at the Royal Academy of Music and had a scholarship. She was a composer, and she left her life and her career to raise my sister and I. My father was a savant, a genius, a prodigy. He directed the Seattle Baby Orchestra at the age of 3. He was making recordings and records before he was 11 years old. He could write music in his head. He was prolific and actually created a number of symphonies. He directed the Boston Pops and the Philharmonic Orchestra. He did Super Bowl halftimes for a number of years in a row. He founded a company called Up With People with 3 other people, and he actually was offered the job of head of music production for Paramount Pictures.
Wow. So I need not ask where you got your creativity. It is in your DNA.
It's in my DNA. Yeah. I remember as a little girl, before my dad grew up and became what he calls what he called his full C. Um, he used to say, you can't make a music in the arts. You can't make a living in the arts. You can't survive in the arts. What happened to me was an anomaly, and you can't live on that. So you need to get a regular job. I know that, like, I know now in the afterlife, he's sitting there holding his hand to his forehead, because I always knew I could, but he said that was my bipolar. Like, he didn't call it bipolar, but he called it like um a delusion.
Hmm.
And he was trying to protect me, but in the process it hurt. I remember I tried violin, and one day he came in and he was joking and he said someone killing a cat in one of the other rooms. So
Mm.
I stopped playing violin. Um, they were always proud of my art. I won an art competition in the second grade. I won art competitions over and over again when I was a little girl. Um, but as I got older, no one had an interest for that. So for a while, I had a complex about that, like I couldn't do it. Then when I was older, I started having episodes of mania.
Mm.
And during those episodes of mania, I ended up making a series of horrific decisions. But one of the decisions I made was to be a professional singing telegram person.
What now?
I was a singing telegram.
I
Delivery
learn
person.
something new about you every damn day, and I freaking love it. So, okay, musical family being pushed away from the arts. How does one end up as a singing telegram?
I went and auditioned, and it's so funny because you remember strange things from back in that time. And I remember I saw her notes, and it was 115 degrees, and I walked to the audition, and I was plump, and I've always been plump. I've always been, not svelte. And I went to the audition, and I remember her note said something to the effect of, beautiful voice, great stage presence, plump, comma, crossed out fat,
Are you serious?
sweat stains underarm. Yeah, I had sweat stains, but that stayed with my OCD bipolar brain for decades. And then I started doing singing telegrams, and I got booked a lot. And I did impressions of Mae West, and I did the French housekeeper, and then I did the gay man's breakup song, which I wrote. And
I am like absolutely blown away right now. This is so crazy. But you know, one of the things that's just sticking out to me so much is like the effect that people can have on us when we are just in those formative years and
yeah,
and we're just becoming, and how the weight of some passing comment, the weight that that can carry, that we can carry as we go through our lives.
we can. And it's powerful. I dated this guy, and he used to always come back and back and back. And being bipolar, I was extraordinarily promiscuous. I was super, super slutty. And he told me once, he goes, you're really beautiful. You'd be even more beautiful if you lost 80 pounds. Well, I weighed 160. So I explained to him that if I lost 80 pounds, I'd be 80 pounds. And I would look like Karen Carpenter. And people don't realize what they say, but there's always been a stigma against, the fat girl. And so I grew up believing I was the dumpy girl, the
Mm.
fat girl. I had that throughout most of my life. So it got in my head that I couldn't be in the arts because I wasn't right. I
Mm.
wasn't the right body type. I wasn't the right presence. I wasn't the right look. And that stuck with me for decades. It's still with me.
Mhm.
I had this man I was in love with. We were living together. He had never introduced me to his family. One day we saw his aunt at the mall. She was on the other side of the mall through a partition where you had to walk quite a ways to get through a walkway. And he saw me and he shoved me into a jeans rack in a store so that she wouldn't see me.
Oh my God.
Later, I asked him why he would do such a thing. And he said, do you know what she asked me? She asked me if I knew who that short, chubby, dumpy girl was that I was with. And I sat there for a moment and I said, I don't know what's worse. The fact that she said that, or the fact that you felt you needed to say it to me directly and repeat it. And we obviously didn't stay together, but I did love him.
Hmm.
But that set my perception of myself there for years, which affected my ability to perform. It affected my ability to sing. It affected my confidence in everything from art to writing to relationships to my whole self-esteem. So getting to where I am now, which is not idealistic, but I like who I am. I like that I wake up every day and I make a decision. I'm going to live today and be kind. And if I can't be kind, I'm going to do the best I can to move through it quickly.
And you're a shining example of kindness today. All who know you love you, and you bring warmth and just joy to a lot of people. So I'm glad you didn't give up. So through all this time, when you're coming of age and you're feeling the pressure of, just the words of others, but you still kind of stay on this creative train. What was it that kind of kept you going? Was there ever because you and I have talked privately about where does inspiration come from? What, is it divine? Is it something else? What brings you back to creativity even in those tough times?
Inside of my heart, I always knew that I was an artist, even if other people wouldn't believe me. And I would make whatever I could out of art. Sometimes I'd make embarrassing scrapbooks for boyfriends that were so awkward, and I'd write poetry about it. And oh my God, I would die of embarrassment if I saw any of those now. But I knew that I was an artist. I was a poet. I was an artist. I was a writer. And that creatively was the best way to express. But I always heard my dad in my back of my head saying, you can't make a living on that. I was a fluke. Can I jump ahead for a sec? Years later, when I was in prison, someone had an art exhibit for me. My dad and my mom, they went to that exhibit. I had always been Herb Allen's daughter because my dad was a superstar, He wrote the music for Karchner Caverns here in Arizona, which is a national park. And he was always Herb Allen, and I was always Herb Allen's daughter. On this day, someone came up to him and said, "Are you Maryanne's father?" And he said to me, "I am Maryanne's father." And he said to me, in that moment, I got it. And I realized how sad that it had to be when I couldn't see it. Oh, I loved my parents. And I was so sad that my illness made their life so difficult. But it was such an honor that day for him to be my father.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. So, we are going to talk about your experience in terms of as much as you are comfortable to share.
Okay.
So you spent 14 years in federal prison?
No.
State prison. On a wrongful conviction or a crime that somebody else confessed to.
Yes,
So
both.
talk to us.
Um,
Can you give us the journey to that
mhm.
as much as you're comfortable sharing?
um, Sometimes bipolar manifests and appears in different ways to different people. And for me, I cycled in periods of 7 years. I don't know many other people who had that, but I would be in mania for about 7 years, and then I would be in depression for about 7 years. I had a compoundment of obsessive compulsive disorder. So I get fixated. Um, it still happens. There's no cure for either of these things, but you can temper the symptoms. And they're finding great success with anti-epileptic medication, which is what I'm on right now. But I had a series of wonderful ideas that were actually wonderful ideas. But I was gullible, foolish, impulsive, compulsive. And all I thought about all the time was how to make more money so I could hire more people, so I could help more people. I wanted everyone to have what I had. They may not even realize it yet, but all I ever wanted was to make other people happy. It was core, the core purpose of who I am and what I wanted to be. So I gave without restriction, hedonistically, I took them where they wanted to go. I bought them cars, bought them a house. I gave millions of dollars away, and it was never enough. And I believed everything that was told to me. And then when I discovered that not everything was the truth, I didn't know how to handle it. I knew that I was mentally ill, but I didn't understand to what extent. I didn't understand why the things I were doing was wrong. I took advice from bad people. I hired someone who told me he was a broker dealer, and his name was Tuk Win. And that's public record. But it turned out that Tuk Win is a name like John Smith in America. So he showed me someone else's broker dealer license.
Wow.
Why wouldn't I believe it? There's his name. I don't know Vietnamese names. I hired a lot of young people because I wanted them to grow with me and have a future. And I believed everything that was told to me, even when I shouldn't have. And then I just got sicker and sicker and more stressed and not really understanding what was happening. I spent a lot of time going to music events and to parties and buying clothes like a lunatic. I was a compulsive shopper. I spent $1 million in 1 year at Neiman Marcus. We financed their couture floor. At the time, it felt successful. But I look back now and I realize that was mania.
Did you ever feel at that point like everything was going to come crashing down?
No.
You were just in that high, and that was kind of, you were riding that wave.
We had made it.
Mm.
That's what I believed. We had made it.
Mhm.
We were successful. I had this ideological idea of a utopia
Mm.
where we could be creatives and we could all succeed. I think that they knew I was sick. They had to know I was sick. And they said terrible things about me when I wasn't around. I didn't realize it at the time. But when everything happened, they all left. And then the state of Arizona said, you can basically keep everything if you just testify against her. So they did.
So let's back up a second there. So when you say when it all happened, like talk to us about that day when your world ended.
It wasn't just a day. It was a series of events. I had a personal assistant, and she went to this very splooshy furniture store and told them that she was having an affair with my husband, and he wanted her to furnish and buy a love nest. And would they keep it secret? And they said, oh, they deal with that sort of thing all the time. She spent $30,000 and stole $100,000 from the company by getting all the same credit cards that we had. So it would just be payments to those credit cards. We finally caught her, confronted her, prosecuted her. She never got a single thing. They never gave her anything because they wanted me. And she told them anything that they wanted to hear. So it started with her. She was a horrible witness. She was unlikable. She was evil. Even her own attorney said, you don't have to like her. I don't like her. She's not legal. She's illegal. She's horrible. She's a horrible person. I'm pretty sure that's verbatim what they said in the middle of trial. You don't have to like her at all. She's unlikable. But it started with her. They gave her immunity in exchange for whatever she would give on me. Didn't even matter if it was true. So it started with her. And then the co-defendant, they didn't even put in the press until after I announced it. They said it was on me. He confessed. He admitted he did it. No one cared. He was deaf. So they called me a swindler of the deaf and the elderly. I believed in what we were doing. And when I felt we were doing something wrong, I asked to change things to loans so we could be compliant. But in the end, I was just a woman who was in mania, trying to manage a situation that was way over my head. They were right about that. There was all sorts of allegations of forged documents and all sorts of things. And no one even cared when other people talked about it. Other people confessed to lying. No one cared. They just didn't care. And everyone testified against me. And it was a mess. Many people said my case never should have even gone to trial. It was compromised evidence, illegal seizures. Let's be clear. I was prosecuted because of the way I spent money. That's the bottom line. I was prosecuted because I was in mania and they didn't like my personality and they didn't like how vivacious I was and they didn't like how I lived and they didn't like how flamboyant I was or how flamboyant my husband was.
Mm.
Do you know that there's this saying, you can prosecute a ham sandwich? It's true. They couldn't prosecute my husband. So they created a BS case to prosecute him. Ultimately, they sentenced us to probation in that other case, which should never have gone to trial because it should have come after the big case. It was also, I would have no support in court.
Mm.
My family wasn't allowed to attend. They were all listed as witnesses. And then after the fact, at closing, the prosecutor said, look, your family didn't even show. We had a now $63 million judgment against us, where we were told all of our legal fees had been disgorged. We had no defense. And if we tried to defend ourselves, it would all be used against us in prosecution. So we followed the advice of not defending it because we couldn't. And my husband, if working in a traditional job, would lose 25% of his income for the rest of his life. Here's the kicker. Not 1 cent would ever go to a victim. Because in the time that we've been talking, there has probably been upwards of about $20,000 in interest accruing right now. And I wish that was an exaggeration, but it's not. I mean, if I'm wrong about that, it's equally as obscene.
So much of this sounds like to a layperson like so abstract and terrifying and scary. But what I always think about must have been extremely traumatic for you is like that sentencing day when you find out your fate. Like, tell us about that day.
I wasn't allowed to see my husband. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. They prosecuted him to keep us apart. And I went in that day, and my parents were there, and their friends were there because the trial was finally over when they weren't allowed to be there anymore. And they sentenced me to 32 years. When I was at closing, the prosecutor literally rattled off my symptoms. He even admitted there was no direct evidence. He said, let's go with the defense's statement. There isn't a scintilla of evidence. But let me ask you, what would a reasonable person have done, knowing fully well I was mentally ill, because he blocked that testimony 5 years before court?
Now, for context, 32 years. What do murderers and rapists in Arizona get sentenced to?
25.
Yeah. White collar crime. A woman.
Yeah.
35 years.
32.
32. I'm sorry. So you get sentenced.
And it was, you know, like by the time it was done, I was charged in federal. I was charged in state. I was charged in a second case in state. I had a total of 98 charges. It was persecution. It wasn't prosecution. And it was vilifying. You know, even when I was evaluated by a doctor, the prosecutor faxed a preamble to my doctor before I got diagnosed. I was never allowed a fair trial, and I was never allowed a defense. And I was prosecuted for my mental health symptoms. Literally, the American Psychiatric Association has a description of bipolar and OCD and traits and symptoms. And those were the closing arguments in my case. It was a wrongful conviction. It was shameful. When it happened, I heard this voice inside. And it said, this is not your reality. And it's not going to work out this way. So you just need to make it through today. There's this newspaper article out there that says, tears streamed down Maryanne Chisholm's face. but nobody knew why. I didn't even understand how to feel shame because I didn't even understand what had happened. I don't even remember everything that happened. And to add insult to injury, when I went to jail, I was told that if I didn't take my psych meds, I would get a new felony. So I was not allowed to use my mental health as a defense. But if I didn't medicate my mental health after being in prison to the degree that they wanted me to medicate, I would get a new charge. It just felt so unfair. And when I got to jail, there were I don't know, I think 200 women in my pod, maybe. And they lined up and hugged me because they all saw it on the news.
How old were you, Maryanne?
I was 40 and
You
I'm
had,
57 now.
you had children at home? How old were your kids?
My daughter was 9. My youngest son was 13 and my oldest son was 16. And I felt like such a failure. I was so angry at myself. Like I should have understood what was wrong with me. Why didn't I know what was wrong with me?
That first night, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine like having your freedom taken away from you, and the stress of the trial, and just contending with your own mental health and this new environment. Like, can you remember like putting your head on the pillow, or not, no
Yeah,
pillow? Can you remember that first night?
there was no pillow. The guard in solitary, because that's where I was, because I was high profile. She brought me a fish dinner. I'm allergic to fish. For some reason, it wasn't showing up on my allergy tests. I've never understood why. But if I eat it, I get anaphylaxis and my head swells like bad. And she brought me this fish dinner and she said, here's your dinner. I'm so sorry. It's the worst possible outcome. And I said, I'm allergic to fish. And she said, what happens if you eat it? And I said, I would die. She said, I'll go away for 10 minutes in case you want to. So I thought about it. And then I didn't. I think I ate the corn next to it.
Maryanne, how did you have any fight in you at that point? Like, I'm so just blown away by your grit and your spirit and your determination to just to go through all of those days. I mean, you ultimately spent 14 years in prison.
Yeah.
How did you find that determination to keep going day after day?
My husband. And something that happened several years before. This is so cheesy. It's so strange. Such a strange story, but We lived in a house that was haunted. It would sound totally manic depressive if it was just me saying it, but dozens of people saw it. So we did this huge renovation on our house and we had ghosts. It was very strange. One night, my daughter and I were walking through the living room before I went through anything. And she stopped in the dark room and she pointed with her hand and she said, Mommy, say goodbye to the angels. So I turned around because we had a painting of angels. And I said, oh, they're over there. And she said, no, the real ones. And then she stopped. And she put up her hand and she said, Mommy, take a picture. Follow my finger. That's for when you don't believe in God anymore.
Wow.
When I was in prison or jail, actually, I told my husband, I don't believe in God anymore. There is no God because God wouldn't allow such a travesty like this.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent me that photo. It was too light, like I'd never seen anything like it. Beams of light with like a little jetpack behind them. I mean, it was very strange. And he said, what about this? And I looked at that every day. And each time I had to move to a different prison or a different jail, he'd send it to me again with that on the bottom. What about this? What about that?
Hmm.
When I thought about it, I thought, you know, this isn't fair. You know that this is not a just case. You know, and you have to start thinking and believing that you're going to have an appeal and you'll go home.
Mm-hmm.
So I started telling people that. They called me delusional. They said, you're never going to go home. You're going to die in prison. You'll never see your grandchild. You'll never be home. And yet inside I knew I would. I've always believed in the laws of attraction. So I'm in the 0.05% of Arizonans that have gone home after a big case like this. A handful. Was I exonerated? No. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to go to Congress. And I'm going to speak in front of Congress about the way that we treat people with mental illness. And I saw myself in my imagination doing that. I saw myself. But I had several like profoundly spiritual moments in prison and in jail. Crazy, weird moments. A couple of events in dreams and a couple of events in watching people die or knowing someone was going to die before they did. But the one thing I kept being told was, this is not your reality. You can deal with it while you have to live through it, but it's not going to be forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believed that. And I really believed that's the thing that kept me alive.
Now, along this journey, which is just so riddled with trauma, we can talk a little bit about some of the things that happened, but you find solace in creating artwork every day.
I do.
Tell us about the first day that you realized you had this little escape that could bring you away from your reality.
I didn't want to talk to anybody. So I didn't. I didn't trust anyone. So I asked Mark, to send me computer printouts, 30 at a time. And then I would reproduce them on the back of envelopes. So for 365 days, I did great masterpieces in history, in pencil, in colored pencil. And every day that I did it, this little group of people would go running up to the door, because at this period of time I was in federal jail, and you had to put it in the door for outbound mail because there was nowhere you were allowed to put anything. And this little stampede of feet would go up as I was walking away. It was so flattering. And they would go and look at all those envelopes. And I realized during that time that I was perhaps good, you know. So I started doing portraits. We didn't have much to work with at that time. I sometimes did them in Mr. Sketch marker pens on t-shirts. And then I learned how to bleed them, and ended up doing these amazing watercolors, including one of Jesus for a woman from Mexico, which was strange because I'm not religious. I'm more spiritual. And I started doing it, and soon I was working all the time. And when I painted like that, I wasn't in that cell. I was wherever those colors were. You know, I do want to tell you that when they took all of our money and all of our assets, they came in and they took everything of value, and they left us one piece of paper as our inventory. And on that piece of paper, they inventoried a Teletubby.
What now?
They used a line from our inventory to inventory a Teletubby. So we reported the receiver to the FBI. And then while we were in the middle of that, I got a fine of $600 for running a red light in my Mercedes, which was in the custody of the state. And it was a red light camera back then. And there's the receiver, his fat, sweaty face, wearing a tuxedo, driving my Mercedes on New Year's Eve. So Rachel, the reason they always had it out for me is because I published it on the internet.
The picture?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it still viewable?
Huh?
Is it still viewable?
Yeah. It's on the Wayback Machine. Mm-hmm. And they deliberately undersell assets for like a penny per dollar so that you can prosecute the people without having to pay back the victims. It's a whole racket. So the FBI interviewed me, not about me, about him. And the state could not handle that. My bankruptcy attorney sat in on the meeting. She said, I would never believe this if I hadn't seen it. And after that, they wanted me bad. They wanted me because I exposed their racket, which they still do to this day in the state of Arizona.
And that wasn't the only mistreatment or misuse of police funds or police resources. There was more.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't want you to have to relive a lot of this trauma, but there was a point during your journey where you brought in or were able to make contact with the ACLU about an incident that happened that ultimately led to some significant change.
Yes, it did.
Positive change. So do you want to talk about just as much as you're comfortable talking about with that incident?
My attorney argued in front of the US Supreme Court and won reform in California. Next stop, Arizona. I was one of the 13 plaintiffs that sued the Department of Corrections for what amounted to, in the end, if I'm not mistaken, to the best of my knowledge, was about $6 billion in reform. They constantly violated the order. They settled. They constantly refused to do it, but they never forgave me. They kept me 6 months longer than they were allowed to by law. And during that time, my father died.
So sorry.
Yeah. You know, mental illness is not a sympathetic illness. Typically, we get very angry at people who are mentally ill. We don't understand. But I think I figured it out. It's because people that are mentally ill do not behave the way society deems normal. And because people who are mentally ill do not behave in the way society deems normal, they are the villain. There's so many other solutions that we could go to, so many other ways that we could solve this problem.
Mm.
But why not villainize us?
Mm.
It's easier. Do I regret doing what I did with that? I don't. No one else ever had the guts to do that.
Mhm. And when we say do that, you reported them for
Yes.
for something that actually happened that was extremely humiliating for you.
Yes.
You don't have to talk about it if you're not comfortable, but it was something that was inhumane. You talked about how, prison is a place where you're supposed to, serve your sentence.
Yeah.
But what it felt like to you throughout that experience was punishment,
Yes.
right?
There's two schools of thought. There's the school of thought of people go to prison to be punished. And then there's the school of thought of people who go to prison have already been punished. And I live in a state where people go to prison to be punished.
What I do
Okay.
want to talk about is your artwork, because we talked about you doing the masterpieces. From the masterpieces, you started to find your own ideas and your own eye and your own inspiration, and you started to create your own work every day.
I
What did that?
painted murals in the prison too.
You
I
did?
was the mural painter. Me and my friend Valerie, and then later a lady named Catherine, and then later some other people. Yeah, and I really put my soul into 'em. Um, but then they just painted over them. So when I saw that happen, I couldn't do it anymore because it just felt like, I mean, I really took it way more seriously than I should have, you know? Um, so I started doing my own things, and then I started showing in the Herberger while I was in prison, and I was the featured artist at TED Talk in Perryville. In fact, my art was the only art that was featured in the actual event. And I did a painting of Conan O'Brien, and I got a contract and a t-shirt offer, but then they couldn't do it because I was in prison, and they can't make negotiations with unsavory people. But that painting was my Mona Lisa. It wasn't his fault. He felt bad about it. He started the show a number of times in front of it. And he was definitely an inspiration to laugh. I lived through surviving by watching TV. TV was my only thing that I looked forward to.
Mm.
And in the last 6 months that I was there, my mom developed dementia. So I never got to say goodbye to her, where she knew who I was. I am not friends with my sister. My sister testified against me. She didn't even know any details. So not only did she testify against me, she was not allowed to testify at the trial because the prosecutor by law is not allowed to suborn perjury. But when my dad died, she did everything she could to keep my husband from going to the funeral. I never got to disperse his ashes. And when my mom died, this is so awful. I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, but she held the power of attorney, and her body remained at the morgue for weeks, and there was nothing I could do about it. My mom had always favored me. My sister was always more of a daddy's girl.
Mhm.
And I loved my dad so much. All I ever wanted was his approval. But my mom and I were really close. And knowing that my mom had been left in the morgue for that long, and then she was never given a funeral.
I'm so sorry, Maryanne.
No, I'm sorry for her. So I'm not a fan of my sister,
Yeah.
who was, I believe, the head of the Tea Party in Bullhead City, Arizona.
Ah,
And was very good friends with a woman named Kelly Ward, who's actually was just ridiculed a couple of days ago on The Daily Show. So if you want to know who that is, go look her up. But I am a liberal. I bleed blue. I'm a tree hugging, support the elderly, support the poor, help people in need, liberal. And I've always felt like my sister was some sort of accidental alien abduction because we're so different. But she told people at my dad's funeral that she was the only child.
must have been devastating.
Now, when I got out of prison, I began to modify what paintings I still had, and there were a few, and started selling those and doing portraits, hyperrealism portraits. And and then eventually I moved into NFTs.
So, okay. So now you've been out of prison for how many years?
Since 2018, December.
Okay. So 4 years out.
Mhm.
And last year, 2021, you find or hear about something called NFTs and how a couple of artists are selling these pieces of artwork on the blockchain.
It was 2021. It was March, and there was people and his 5,000 every days. And I thought, I did that. How many people have done that? I painted every single day that I could. There were some days I didn't, but there were other days where I did too. I think I spent about, I don't know, like 4,600 days. I can't remember the exact count, but I did over 5,600 paintings. I only have a record of, I think, about 400. There's so many paintings out there. Do you know I sold them for a bag of coffee or chips or cookies, you know, things that we missed.
I could believe it.
And I created movement or adjusted them or changed them and made NFTs. And then I felt like that time was worth something. You're not allowed to profit off anything made in prison. So I always made sure that I changed them, animated them, altered them, you know, made them slightly different. But they were all me. They were all a reflection because each one was a day. Each one was how I coped with that day. And each one had a poem. So I wrote 5,600 poems. I wanted my children to see that you can still make something of yourself, even if you're in prison, even if you've lost your freedom, even if you've been told that you're going to die there. I wanted them to know that wasn't going to be me. So that's why I did it.
That's beautiful. And you have had quite significant success, not just as an artist, but you've also become a personality in the NFT Web3 space, building, a weekly Twitter space show that has had almost 60,000 listeners so far.
Yeah.
And over 2,000 other artists have sold their artwork. So talk to us about that journey, what that means to you now to kind of come full circle in this life experience where you began questioning your capabilities as a creative, and now you kind of stand in this moment. What does that mean?
Well, we've had, I think in excess of I think about 3,700 sales. And they're one-to-one artists. So what that means is they're people that are doing one-of-a-kind art, not PFPs or not little tiny collectibles, but real, valuable expressions of their life and their personality. And that's been mind-altering. It's gratifying, and it's a wonderful way to make other people happy.
I'm so proud of you.
Thanks.
You're a phenomenal artist, and you're a phenomenal human.
Thanks.
And you inspire so many of us in this space. And you're loved.
You inspire me too. I love you. And I love this community. I really do. It's the first time I feel like I'm a place where I belong.
Mm-hmm. Somebody's out there and they're feeling a bit lost and they're going through their own personal trauma right now and they feel hopeless. What's your message?
You can overcome anything. You have to change your thinking. You have to make your mind up to wake up every day and know that it's going to change, even if you're made fun of, even if you're ridiculed. There's two sayings that I live by. One of them is, character is what you are in the dark. And if you see someone and you see their character in the dark and you don't like it, that is the truth of who they are. and you need to move on.
Mhm.
I was determined to make my character in the dark be one of compassion. I don't want anyone to ever feel the trauma or the pain that I felt. The other thing is, if you believe you can, or if you believe you can't, it's true.
It's one of my mom's favorites. I love that.
Yeah.
Maryanne, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please tell people where they can find you online.
They can find me on Twitter, and you could just search Maryanne Chisholm. My name is Maryanne Chisholm too. Why? Because I ran out of letters and now I'm stuck with it forever.
Oh,
But
there's
I have
awesomeness.
a tag. It's for Maryanne Chisholm, so you can find me.
Amazing. Well, folks, this has been the Smart Art Business Podcast. So glad that you could join us today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Please also share this episode if you feel inspired to do so. Like, share, blast it out on social media platforms. Make sure you are following the wonderful Maryanne Chisholm. She's an inspiration to all of us. And we are extremely, extremely grateful for her. And we will see you next time. Thanks.